Fox News Alert, the jury just sentenced Karmelo Anthony. We're going to be back with Brooke Taylor, who's live outside the courthouse. What do we have?
Hi, Jesse. Some pretty breaking news to give you right now. The jury has sentenced Karmelo Anthony to 35 years behind bars after finding him guilty of murder.
A black teenager was just sentenced to 35 years in prison in Texas. The jury that convicted him had 0 black jurors on it. Not one. And the prosecution made sure of that. Let that sit with you for a second before we go anywhere else in this story. Now, before you close this video, before you decide you already know where this is going, stay with me. Because this case is not as simple as the people screaming outside that courthouse want you to believe. It is not as clean as the people celebrating the verdict want you to believe either. The truth about what happened in that courtroom and what happened under that tent in Frisco, Texas, on April 2nd, 2025, is sitting somewhere in the middle. And nobody is talking about that middle, so that is exactly where we are going today. Welcome to Kova True Crime. If you are new here, subscribe right now. We do not pick sides. We break down the evidence and we let you decide. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. And if you have been here before, thank you. Every share, every like, every comment you leave helps this channel put these cases in front of people who need to see them. Now, let's talk about race. Let's talk about self-defense. And let's talk about whether a jury of 12 people got it right, or whether something else was happening in that courtroom in McKinney, Texas. Here is the part of this story that makes a lot of people deeply uncomfortable. And it needs to be said out loud before anything else. When jury selection began in the Karmelo Anthony murder trial on June 1st, 2026, the jury pool started with 589 people. By the time the lawyers finished making their strikes, 12 jurors and 6 alternates had been seated. And when people looked at that final panel, not one of them was black. In a county where black residents make up over 10% of the population, in a city where the black population sits right around 10%, the math says a randomly selected jury of 12 people would have roughly a 99.4% chance of including at least one black person. The final jury had 0. That did not happen by accident. The defense raised what is called a Batson challenge, a legal objection that says the prosecution is using its strikes to remove jurors based on race, which is unconstitutional. The defense pointed out that prosecutors had dismissed 3 black prospective jurors in a row, despite them being similarly situated to a white juror who was allowed to stay. The prosecution pushed back. They argued the dismissals were race-neutral. 1 black juror had been an educator. One had made comments that raised concerns about their impartiality. And this is the one that spread across social media faster than anything else in this trial, had told prosecutors during vetting that they would have a hard time, quote, putting a brother in jail. Judge John Roach heard the Batson challenge. He overruled it. The all-white jury was seated. And Karmelo Anthony, a black teenager, went on trial in front of them. Now, is that racism? Is that the system working exactly the way people have been saying it works for decades? Or is it a coincidence? An unfortunate, statistically unlikely, but legally permissible outcome of a jury selection process that followed the rules. People on both sides of this debate will give you a very confident answer. We are going to make you think harder than that. Let's go back to what actually happened at Kuykendall Stadium on April 2nd, 2025. Because if we are going to have a serious conversation about whether the verdict was just, we need to be honest about the facts. It is a Thursday morning. The UIL District 11-5A Track Championship. Multiple Frisco high schools competing. A storm rolls in fast. Rain delay. Athletes scramble for cover under team tents. Small canvas canopies set up by each school. Each one designated for that school's athletes. Under the Memorial High School tent, it is packed. Memorial athletes shoulder to shoulder, coaches nearby, and parents in the bleachers a few yards away. Sitting among them, in Memorial's tent, in Memorial Gear's rivals' territory, is Karmelo Anthony, a junior at Centennial High School across town. He is not a participant in the events happening at that moment. He is sitting on the metal bleachers with his backpack on his lap, staying dry. Austin Metcalf notices him. Austin is 17 years old, an honor student, MVP linebacker of the Memorial football team, voted by his own coaches and teammates. He plays track to build speed for football season. His twin brother Hunter is right there beside him. Austin approaches Anthony and tells him he needs to move. This is their team's tent. What happens next is where this case becomes a genuine debate, not a simple one. Witnesses say Anthony was asked to leave up to 15 times. He did not move. The verbal exchange escalates. The volume goes up. A crowd forms. And then witnesses testify to something that becomes the most critical detail in the entire prosecution's case. While the argument was still entirely verbal, before anyone had touched anyone, Anthony already had his hand inside his backpack, gripping the knife, not reaching for it after he was pushed. Then he looked at Austin and said, "Touch me and see what happens." Austin shoved him. 2 hands, 1 push, and Karmelo Anthony pulled out a folding knife and drove it into Austin Metcalf's chest. Austin fell. Hunter dropped to his knees beside his brother. He tried to stop the bleeding with his hands. It did not work. Austin Metcalf died at the scene. He was 17 years old. Now here is the question this entire country has been fighting over for 14 months. Was that murder? Or was that a scared kid defending himself? Let's take the self-defense argument seriously, because a lot of people do, and some of them have very real points. Karmelo Anthony was 5 feet 8 inches tall. He weighed significantly less than Austin Metcalf, who stood at 6 feet 1 and around 200 pounds, a conditioned varsity linebacker built to physically overpower people. When Anthony was frankly sitting on those bleachers and Austin approached him demanding he move, the size difference was visible to everyone under that tent. And the defense argued that when Austin initiated physical contact, a hard 2-handed shove, a smaller, seated kid surrounded by a rival team had genuine reason to fear what was coming next. The defense said Anthony could not retreat. Bleachers behind him, storm in front, a wall of opposing athletes on all sides. The body cam recording shows Anthony being detained by Officer Eduardo Cortez moments after the stabbing. Anthony looks at the officer and says, "I'm not alleged, I did it." The prosecution called it a cold confession. The defense reframed it as transparency, a kid who genuinely believed he had done nothing wrong because he believed he had defended himself. And before the handcuffs were on, Anthony told a coach, "He put his hands on me. I told him not to. I stabbed him. He did not run far." He did not hide the weapon. He said exactly what happened. The defense also pointed to the single strike as evidence against premeditation. If this was cold-blooded murder driven by rage, why only 1 wound? A frenzied attack looks like multiple injuries, multiple wounds, and a sustained assault. Anthony struck once and stopped. The defense argued this looks like a reaction, a panicked attempt to create distance, not a calculated killing. And then there is the question hanging over all of it, the one that keeps people up at night. Would Karmelo Anthony be sitting in a Texas prison cell right now if the races were reversed? If Austin Metcalf had been a black teenager with a knife and Karmelo Anthony had been the white football player asking him to move, would that jury have come back with the same verdict in the same amount of time? People who say yes to that question are not making it up from thin air. They are drawing on a history of cases where that exact scenario played out differently. That question deserves to be asked. It deserves to be taken seriously. And it does not have an easy answer. But here is where the self-defense argument runs into a wall. And this wall is not built on race. It is built on the timeline. Self-defense is a reaction. By legal definition, by common sense definition, and by every basic understanding of what the word means, it is a response to a threat that already exists. You do not react to something before it happens. But the witnesses who took that stand, teenagers who were standing right there under that tent, told the jury that Anthony's hand was already inside his backpack, already on that knife, while the argument was still verbal. before Austin stepped toward him. Before the shove happened, before any physical contact was made, he was already holding it. Think about what that means for 1 second. If you are scared, your instinct is to get out of the situation. You look for a teacher, a coach, an exit. You ask for help. You do not quietly slip your hand into your bag and grip a weapon while the other person is still just talking. You do not then look them in the eye and say, "Touch me and see what happens." That is not fear, that is a dare. And a dare is not self-defense. A dare is an invitation. Texas law has a specific concept for this, provoking the difficulty. If you are the one who set up the conditions for a confrontation, you cannot then hide behind self-defense when that confrontation arrives. The prosecution looked at that jury and made it simple. You cannot bait someone into touching you and then claim you were forced to defend yourself when they do exactly what you told them to do. And the medical examiner's testimony removed the last possible argument about an accidental or panicked strike. 1 wound, directly into the heart. The force required to reach the heart, through clothing, through skin, through muscle, past the ribcage, is not accidental. You cannot stumble into a wound like that. It requires direction, it requires force, it requires intent. The doctor said so under oath. The prosecution also dismantled the tent-as trap argument in a way the jury clearly accepted. That tent was not a dark alley. It was not a deserted parking lot at midnight. It was surrounded by coaches, teachers, and parents at a school event in broad daylight. If Anthony was genuinely terrified, he had every option available to him. He could have raised his voice. He could have called for a coach who was 6 feet away. He could have asked anyone in that crowd to step in. The prosecution told the jury that a scared person looks for adults. A person who isn't scared but angry, that person grips a knife and waits. Now, let's go back to the jury, because this is where the race conversation becomes impossible to ignore, even if you believe the verdict was correct. The jury pool started with 589 people. The prosecution used their strikes to remove every single qualified black prospective juror from the panel. The defense raised the constitutional challenge. The judge overruled it, and a black teenager was convicted of murder by an all-white jury in Texas. You can believe the verdict was legally correct, that the evidence supported murder, not self-defense, and still believe something went wrong in that jury selection room. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. Legal scholars and civil rights advocates have both pointed out that the Batson challenge process in America has a well-documented weakness. Prosecutors are allowed to use race-neutral explanations to justify removing jurors of color, and courts almost always accept those explanations. The result is that all white juries in racially charged cases happen with a frequency that cannot be explained by coincidence alone. One prospective black juror said during vetting that he would have a hard time putting a brother in jail. The prosecution used that statement as the reason for the strike, and on its face, you can understand why. A juror who is pre-decided based on the defendant's race is not an impartial juror. But here's what the defense pointed out. A white juror who pre-decided based on Austin Metcalf's race or based on Karmelo Anthony's race would be equally disqualifying. Were those questions asked? Were those jurors scrutinized the same way? Because the juror who said he would struggle to convict a fellow black man was removed, and the jurors who may have had the opposite bias were seated. That asymmetry is what people mean when they talk about the system. Not that individual people are consciously racist, but the rules are applied unevenly in ways that consistently produce the same result. If you are finding this important, subscribe to Kova True Crime right now. We cover cases the rest of the internet reduces to a headline. Outside the courthouse in McKinney on the day of the verdict, a crowd of roughly 100 people gathered, mostly Anthony supporters. Things got heated. Fights broke out. Racial slurs were screamed in both directions. New Black Panther Party members stood on the courthouse steps. On social media, Cardi B posted, "Wow, just freaking wow, disgusting." This is not justice. This is trying to make an example. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. A Democrat and an attorney suggested on the record that she, too, would have stabbed Austin Metcalf, significantly misrepresenting the physical facts of the case in doing so. And across the street from the Anthony supporters, members of a white supremacist group showed up with signs referencing Austin Metcalf. Even as Austin's own family, from the very first day, explicitly and publicly rejected any attempt to frame this as a racial issue. This was not a race thing. This was not a political thing. Jeff Metcalf told Fox News the day after his son died. Austin's family did not want this. They wanted accountability for their son's murder. Other people hijacked that and turned it into something else entirely. That is the reality of what surrounded this trial. Two sets of people, one side screaming that a black kid was railroaded by a racist system, the other side using a dead white teenager as a banner for something his own parents refused to be associated with. And in the middle of all of it, 12 jurors sat in a room and tried to apply the law to the evidence in front of them. The jury deliberated. They came back with guilty of murder, not manslaughter, which would have meant they believed the killing was not intentional. Murder, meaning they believed Karmelo Anthony knowingly caused Austin Metcalf's death. They rejected the self-defense claim completely. They rejected sudden passion in the punishment phase, and they sentenced him to 35 years. He must serve at least half of 17 and a half years before he is even eligible for parole. He was 19 when that sentence was handed down. He will be approaching 37 before the parole board will hear a single word from him. Anthony filed a notice of appeal less than 24 hours after the conviction. His lawyers are not done. The legal fight may continue for years. But in that courtroom, after the sentence was handed down, Austin Metcalf's mother, Megan, stood up and looked directly at Karmelo Anthony. "You should feel lucky you got 35 years, she said, because I've been given a life sentence without my son." She picked up her papers and walked straight past him, and then Hunter Metcalf stood up. Austin's twin brother, the person who held him on the ground while he died. Hunter asked Anthony to look him in the eye, and then he said, "You took a son, a brother, a friend, my best friend from this world. You took someone from me who was supposed to be an uncle to my kids. Now I want everything taken from you." He told Anthony, "You let the devil take over in that moment." And then he said the words that will outlast everything else about this case. "Eventually your name will be forgotten, but my brother's memory will live on." 2 months earlier, Hunter had walked across the graduation stage at Frisco Memorial, accepted his own diploma, left the stage, came back, and accepted Austin's diploma too, both of them, one brother carrying both. Austin Metcalf was 17 years old, honor student, MVP linebacker, a morning kid, a hugger. His mother called him a peacemaker. Less than 48 hours before he died, he posted, "Faith that God got me and my work will pay off." That post has been seen 2.5 million times. He never saw most of those views. So here is the question we are leaving you with today, and we want you to actually think about it before you comment. Was this justice? Was a 17-year-old kid, regardless of his race, carrying a concealed knife to a rival school's tent, issuing a dare, and stabbing an unarmed teenager who shoved him? Was that murder? Or was a smaller, cornered kid using the only option he believed he had? And separate from that, does the fact that 0 black jurors sat in that box change how you feel about the answer? Can a verdict be legally correct and still be the product of a process that was tilted? We are not telling you what to think. That is your job. Drop your verdict in the comments. We read every single one. If this video made you think, hit the like button. It costs you nothing, and it helps this reach people who are still deciding what they believe. Subscribe to Kova True Crime, and we will see you in the next one.